This is the IVJ podcast for the week of June 17th, 2019. I'm Mason King. We talk a lot nowadays about the lengths to which companies now go to attract and retain highly qualified employees. And that's beyond the obvious stuff like salary and health and retirement benefits. Like during the dot-com boom, it was all about the office amenities and how much fun you could have while you were on the clock. Suddenly, everybody had a ping pong table and a foosball table, giant slides, private lounges, and a keg under every desk. Well, there's been a sea change in the attitude towards perks. Don't get me wrong, job candidates and current employees are still focused on what the company can do for them, but they also want to know how the company can help them benefit other people. They want the company's support in their philanthropic efforts. They want opportunities to volunteer their time and talents to charities and not-for-profits, usually of their own choosing. And they certainly wouldn't mind being able to do that on the clock. For a significant swath of the workforce, and millennials in particular, it's important to be part of a company that cares about its impact on society. Now, beyond making their employees feel better, companies are discovering that there are tangible benefits in offering what they now call corporate responsibility programs. Although they probably shouldn't get too tied up in trying to calculate the return on investment. To get a better sense of this trend, we spoke last week with Josh Driver. He's the founder of Indianapolis-based startup Selflessly. The company helps employers establish and maintain these kinds of programs. Now, a quick heads up. You may hear a faint clicking sound in the first half of the podcast. That is Maggie the Bulldog, who came to Jeff through the Indiana Bulldog Rescue. Once we started recording the podcast, Maggie became very interested in casing the operation. So we'll have more on her as we go. Here's our conversation. Josh, thanks so much for helping us today.
Sure.
Let me just get right into it. When I started working in not my late 80s, in the late 1980s, so my employers were not organizing volunteer days, much less giving me paid time off to volunteer. Occasionally, we were asked to donate to a local charity that the company supported. So what happened? I mean, from management's perspective, how has the attitude changed as far as providing philanthropic outlets for employees?
It started out being managed on the nonprofit side. So they're managing the logistics. Think of like United Way, where you have like payroll deduction and sometimes more passive interactions to where they're contributing, but not a lot of work on the employee side. I think over time, with so many issues in the world going on and so many nonprofits out there, the employees have started to push back much more aggressively now, but in recent years to start being able to make their own decisions on where they can volunteer, what they expect their employers to provide. And it's almost becoming a benefit, much like a 401k or health insurance. I think a great example is the work that Salesforce and Lilly do, through their foundations and deploy these resources that have really been the benefit for the city. And so now people see that great work and they go to their current employer, or they're looking at a company they like to work at and say, well, I want to be able to still continue to invest some of my time in this. Is that possible? Was there a particular trigger? I mean, it's super easy just to blame this on millennials and say, well, they're the ones who... These darn kids.
Yeah. They care about things.
Yeah. I would say... if you look at platforms like GuideStar that have come out and shown this transparency, and the same can be true for corporate responsibility and this transparency about how ethical a brand behaves or a company behaves.
Yeah, and GuideStar, which is something we actually use quite a bit in the news business, gives you a lot of information about the operations of not-for-profits.
And so I think the transparency has been a trigger, and I think stuff that's happened where maybe companies or nonprofits haven't been operating above board, so to speak. We're a very connected society now through social media and technology, that these things bubble up on something and it triggers people to want to get involved.
If we could just for a second place the blame on millennials, what is it about this generation?
I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, and I'm a little bit north of the millennial age range. But I would say this connectivity and people be paying attention to the news or being affiliated with a cause, they're following causes more. The behavior of philanthropy in general is changing. Younger generations are leasing instead of buying, and are looking to stay at jobs for less time and jump. So that behavior makes philanthropy a little more tricky, where we were always trying to get those big checks and longer term engagement. So how do we adjust the fundraising models to reflect maybe more frequent, smaller amounts than less frequent, larger amounts? Mm-hmm. And so in my mind, if people don't have the financial resources to always donate, how do we convert them into an engaged member of that organization? So volunteer time, how can we equate that where that can be an option instead of writing the check once a month?
And I know I'm dipping into the bag of cliches about the millennials, but that's right. It's supposed to be about experiences, right? It's instead of writing a check, the ethos is to have some sort of authentic experience, like to actually spend time doing something. Am I on the right track?
Absolutely. I think when you see this strategic philanthropy, where a company may always get involved with that customer nonprofit they're working with, or they're doing something that's got their logo all over it, you can see that strategic philanthropic engagement, where I would say people in the workforce now are starting to say, all right, so authentically, what are you doing?
Let me use this term, corporate social responsibility. That's a thing.
That's a thing.
What is it?
I like to keep it simple because it means so many different things, and it can be as simple as writing a check, but it can be as much as a overall arching philosophy like Patagonia, where they've allocated so many resources to save forests and the environment. But I really, we have our deck that's essentially business plus charity equals thumbs up, or CSR. So I like to keep it low level and say anytime that a company can provide resources that positively affect a cause or a charity, that's corporate social responsibility.
So for the employer, what is the value?
It's exponential. So I think we talk a lot about employee engagement. We talk about culture. We talk about teamwork within the office. And what do we do for that? We build apps, we build technology, we track these analytics about how happy people are in the workplace. As we start seeing these surveys come out about how happy are you at work, how do you feel about the company you work for, those numbers aren't doing so great depending on the company and the industry. And so I don't know about you, but if I donate or spend time volunteering with a nonprofit, there's that adrenaline rush. There's that I made a difference today in some way or another, and it gives me a sense of that I'm making change or helping something. And I think that can be brought back into the workplace. So anytime you see volunteer hours, or if you look on social media and know somebody that works at a company that did a volunteer day, you see a million posts of them building the house or serving meals. And I think that type of interaction, when it's empowered by the company for the employee to get out and make those connections, that culture, that sense of purpose, that impact starts to shine through, and you see, more productive employees, loyal. And I think we're starting to move into more of like a skills-based opportunity focus too. I graduated college with this degree and I want to work at this company, but I'm in an entry-level position. I need to learn more soft skills. So volunteer opportunities can give me the time to learn a new product or to try my hand at blogging or content generation. So it can be a great way to grow your resume too.
Yeah, and that kind of feeds into the next question is, like, what forms can corporate social responsibility take? Like, if I'm an employer, I want to practice corporate social responsibility, what would that entail for my employees?
We work with companies as small as a retail store on Mass Ave all the way up to the big guns. And I think it's not a one size fits all. And you as a leader really have to look at your company and how you want to run it and prioritize what message you want to send. So obviously there are companies out there that are jumping on social issues and sticking, drawing that line in the sand, which is good. But I think from a simplistic view, we focus on workplace giving, volunteer time off, and then in-kind contributions. And that's something that's scalable across the board. So in looking at your business model and what you can afford to be able to give away, it may not necessarily be revenue from matching donations, but I got a bunch of engaged employees that would love to go the Humane Society or Horizon House. And so having a certain amount of hours for each employee to go out and do their own thing, setting up some collaborative opportunities is good. And then looking at whatever product or service you provide and how could you craft that at a discount or pro bono to provide those for a silent auction item or to help them close the books at the end of the quarter or whatever that may be.
And I assume that employees don't necessarily want the company to just sort of pick a charity and say, well, you can either do this for them or do it on your own. I mean, they want some flexibility is how they spend their time.
Yeah, and I think that there's some awesome grassroots organizations out there that aren't necessarily affiliated with the United Way that resonate with people, and they want to be able to do that. So I think that letting employees take ownership and control of what they feel is the best use of their skills, their time, their talent, treasure, I think that's good. It's good for leadership to say, this is important to you, and that's awesome. Let me give you the tools to be able to do that and not worry about having to take days off or sacrifice the company in that respect.
Let me ask you about one of your volunteer activities in relation to Maggie the bulldog. If people can't tell, there's a bulldog walking around us.
Yes.
What is that connection for you?
So I've been involved with the Indiana Bulldog Rescue for a long time, and as a startup tech guy, work-life balance is not a strong it's not a strong priority at the moment, and so we focus on grabbing the older ones that sleep 23 hours a day. And if we don't make it home right on time, she's none the wiser because she slept the whole time. Okay. So Maggie's our 11-year-old English Bulldog and social media manager and chief mentor, I guess.
Let's take a quick break.
Yeah.
And feed Maggie. We'll be right back.
The IBJ podcast is sponsored by the Office of Minority and Women Business Development, which is committed to serving and certifying businesses owned by minorities, women, veterans, and people with ADA disabilities. The agency helps you access contract opportunities for city, county, municipal, and privately funded projects in central Indiana. For more information, call the office at 317-327-5262 or email at omwbd@indy.gov.
Okay, we're back with Josh Driver, the founder of Selflessly, and I wanted to talk specifically about volunteer time off. What does that mean exactly?
Volunteer time off is the ability for an employee to take paid time and go work with charities they care about.
It's paid time off, and I get the impression by looking at some of the philanthropy stats that this is becoming more and more common.
Yeah, just as common as PTO. When I was at my previous job, we were interviewing a developer, and his first question was, how much volunteer time off do you get? And at that point, we didn't have any program in place, and so we all kind of shrugged and said, I'm going to have to Google that.
That is shocking to me. One of the first questions he asked is, how much volunteer time off do you get? That's really an expectation.
Yeah, and I think that, especially in Indiana, it's relatively easy to start a nonprofit here. And more people are starting to create their own or get deeply involved with causes that they care about. So volunteer time off is a currency of sorts where they're putting that into the total compensation of an employee. So how much time am I going to be able to spend contributing to this organization or towards this mission?
Is there a typical amount of time? I mean, something that's significant?
It varies. More often than not, it's typically like 8 hours is a good starting point a year. Some of our customers gradually increase that as seniority. Some companies are flex timing and just giving an unlimited and allowing them to submit their hours that way. But I think a good, full day, I think that really resonates with an employee that the company gets behind the program, not just checking the box.
See, when you said unlimited time off, the manager in me, which is not much of me, but a manager in me was like, what? We're paying people to do
right?
what? To
pay this person hourly plus. But
it sounds like a productivity killer.
Right. I would challenge, though, and I think that there's metrics to support that when we look at the increasing cost of employee retention and culture. We're pouring money into consulting and all this energy into keeping our employees happy. I would say that time, quote unquote, lost, people come back refreshed. They've been able to use another part of their brain that they may not have been able to. And really, even depending on the engagement. So if I had an employee that took a board position or ran a committee for a big event, we're seeing volunteer hours increased for that volunteer time off from the company because they want them to go and be successful in holding that fundraiser or having that deeper engagement with a nonprofit. It can also make the employee stickier in the long term. So if I want to leave one company for the next and that company's not going to allow me to continue to be on the board of the Bulldog Rescue, that's something I'm concerned about.
So that makes sense to me in terms of making like people connections.
Yeah.
If you're on the board of some organization, obviously you're going to be with some other like-minded, but also, fairly well-connected people in town. That can only help your employer, I would assume.
Absolutely. And I think that nonprofits typically are an industry that is the last to be considered for a lot of B2B companies. And there's a lot of money and good customers to be out there too. So we've had a few nonprofits interact with our for-profit companies and become customers and talk about loyal advocates for your brand.
So what kinds of companies are taking these steps toward corporate social responsibility? Is it easy to say, well, it's this industry and this industry, or is it all over the place?
Well, I think it's more all over the place. I think in our space in Indianapolis, I think we see tech companies take the lead on that and be very clear and transparent about the work that they're doing. And there's, I think, a competitive aspect more so in the tech space than perhaps other industries. But I think the interesting thing is we're seeing smaller companies start to do what they can. So startups, for us, we're small. We took on a project to redo a nonprofit's website. And so we did that out of the gate. And some of our other companies, and we were in a cohort for G Beta for startups. They all are doing something philanthropic. Whereas that, in my previous startup days, you didn't think about that until you were in like a Series A. So I think that that's really unique. But I definitely think that probably tech companies tend to be out in front. Financial, not too far behind. A lot of regulation around that, though. Publicly traded companies, or they have to be able to vet nonprofits before they transfer any type of resource. There's all kinds of different things, but largely it's been tech companies, and then of course your Fortune 500 that have the infrastructure to have a team or a foundation to manage it.
And my understanding of Selflessly is that if I'm a company that really doesn't have an HR department that can really help manage that you have some tools that could help.
Yeah, we think that everybody should be able to play in this space. And so we developed a SaaS platform that can manage workplace giving, volunteer time off, and any of your in-kind contributions. And then we grab all that reporting and roll it up so you can use that for marketing, you can use that for employee metrics, recruitment, retention, whatever those metrics are needed for. We have some that are now wanting to use it for employee reviews. So let's get a holistic picture of this employee, or as an outcome of an employee engagement survey.
So you shared with us in the most recent issue of the IBJ some keys to making an effective volunteer time off program.
Yeah.
So the first one you have here is, if you're a business with employees, you can create a volunteer time off program.
Yeah, absolutely. When we were going out for beta testers, that was the first hurdle. Was I'm only 10 employees. What am I as a small company in startup mode? We can't really do anything. And so I like to turn the table and say, why? If you're taking a half day and doing an employee retreat or a cookout or something team related, why couldn't it be at Gleaners? Why couldn't it be at Habitat for Humanity? So we like to, even the name, corporate social responsibility, that doesn't sound like Selflessly. I don't know. I guess that seems like that's a Lilly, that's a Cummins, that's a big fancy company thing. And so we want to remove that stigma. And so if you are a business, I promise you there is something you can provide back to the community that will be beneficial.
The second is, if you want employees to be engaged, you need to engage your employees.
So when you're thinking about, I'm CEO of X company and we're going to volunteer with this nonprofit, and you're all going to like it. doesn't work. I've learned this firsthand. I worked at a company that had developers, and we wanted to do an outdoor volunteer opportunity that was heavy lifting and 90-degree weather. That's I don't know if you know anybody in your office that may not necessarily want to be out in that 90-degree weather, but would love to make them an email template or would love to help clean up their data. I think you have to be inclusive of what people's abilities and interests are, but also 70 employees and 70 different nonprofits to be involved in. I think it works out better, and we've seen increased engagement when the company says, we want to be a good partner to the community and our employees. Go do what you want and let us support you with the work that you're doing versus telling you where you need to be.
And you hit inclusivity there, which is making sure that employees can give what they want and can give.
Yeah, it's easy to charity shame. And I'm not in the business of saying that one cause is more important than another. When we start forcing employees into a pillar or something dictated top down, that invalidates the interaction an employee may have. I've lost a family member to leukemia. I want to work with Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, but instead I have to go work with this nonprofit. Good intentions all around, but I think when companies start creating that prioritization or favoritism, it takes away from the authenticity.
And the fourth point, what I thought was interesting, I interpreted as this, is don't get too caught up in trying to quantify the return on investment.
Yeah, I mean, it can get very esoteric. When you start trying to do the calculation, so I pay this person $20 an hour and they're leaving 8 hours, so that's $160 plus their benefits is another 30%. I mean, obviously you can start trying to work those numbers out, but then when you start trying to configure what the cost of employee turnover is at your company and what an unsatisfied employee costs you on a daily basis, I mean, we can create a whiteboard that's a mile long with calculations and measurements there. But I think that there are too many opportunities for employees to go to another company these days. And by overcomplicating that 8 hours, are we really making an impact? Are you just trying to check a box? Let people just go, empower them, and see how they come back. Are they refreshed? Are they revitalized? Are they reconnected to your company? And so if someone has a calculation for that or an Excel formula, I'd love to have it.
And then the fifth point is own it. What does own it mean?
I think that it's important for companies to embrace the good work that they're doing, to track that impact, and tell the world the great work that they're doing. If anything, I mean, talk about a beneficial way to compete against your other companies. What a win for everybody.
So it can be a part of your company identity.
Absolutely.
Right on. Well, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks.
My thanks again to Josh Driver and Maggie. You can read more about how Indiana companies are trying to benefit their communities in the Impact Indiana section of this week's IBJ. And I want to draw your attention to a couple other stories as well. John Russell brings us up to date on Indianapolis-based Corteva Agriscience, which recently was spun off as a public company from Dow DuPont. Now, we previously knew it as Dow Agrisciences, and it's a major local employer with 1,500 high-paying jobs. And John reports that it has plans to expand in coming years, but the farming sector is facing some serious headwinds. Also this week, Haley Colombo explains how the city plans to use $55 million in federal tax credits to fund some high-profile projects in low-income or distressed neighborhoods. This is a much greater allotment of tax credits than city officials were expecting from the feds, and community leaders are eager to make their pitches. Again, you can read all about it in this week's print edition of IBJ, which you undoubtedly have delivered to your home or office. And as always, you can check them out at ibj.com. And remember to have full and unfettered access to all of IBJ's award-winning business content. Just hit the subscribe button. Thanks again for making time for the IBJ podcast, which is edited by Leslie Weidenbenner. I'm Mason King, and we'll be back again next week.